What's up, everybody? Good late morning. Floating Head Brendan is still in the house. And now we're going to take a look at another offensive guy that, by the way, we have already requested an interview with. So we are going to be meeting with this guy. It's Frank Smith of the Miami Dolphins. Like Aviro, he's going to be 43 years old when the season starts. So relatively young, relatively new. And his claim to fame, as of right now, is what he did under Mike McDaniel in Miami these last two seasons. I'm sure you guys are aware of how good Miami's offense has been the last 2 years. 2023, it was elite, second in points per game, fourth in EPA per play. So that is an elite offense. And then 2022, the year before, when McDaniel got there, 11th in points per game. And remember, Tua missed some games, so they didn't really have a quarterback for many of these games. And seventh in EPA, .054. So this was a very good offense across these 2 years. And look, he's had Tyreek Hill, maybe the best receiver in football. He's had good running backs, although those running backs are helped significantly by his by some of the stuff that offense is doing schematically. And he's had Eric Waddle, and for most of that time, their quarterback has been healthy. But at this point, we have to have some questions on whether or not Tua is even a good quarterback. I think some people would say that Tua is not good. So if that's the case, then you have to be impressed with Frank Smith getting so much out of a mediocre quarterback. And by the way, an offensive line that was pretty beat up in 2023 and not really playing all that well. So we're off to a good start with Frank Smith. The question is, how do you separate what he's doing from what Mike McDaniel is doing? Mike McDaniel is definitely the engine that makes that offense go, but what has Frank Smith picked up? Is he going to be another Matt Nagy, who was under Andy Reid for a long time but didn't learn enough? Or is he going to be Andy Reid himself, who was under the Great One for a long time and had that greatness rub off on him? Um, it's hard to know until they actually get the opportunity. That's the thing about these coaching hires. Most of the time, you don't know. Unless you're hiring somebody like Mike Vrabel, you just don't know. Before he got to Miami, he was a run game coordinator slash offensive line coach for the Los Angeles Chargers. Not the most productive stop for him. He was there for one season. The Chargers barely missed the playoffs. They didn't have any super high prolific offensive linemen during this time. Maybe Corey Linsley, I guess, would be the one guy. Their run game was average. Run EPA 16th, so dead average. They were 21st in rushing yards in total in 2021, so not much to say about what he did with the Chargers. However, before his stint with the Chargers, he was with the Raiders, who were then the Oakland Raiders, now the Las Vegas Raiders. He was the tight end coach. And during this period of time, the Raiders were getting more out of their tight ends than just about any other team. Darren Waller was their guy for the latter 2 years. Both years he went over 1,100 yards, 90 catches. One year he had 107 catches. In 2019, he also had Foster Moreau, who had 21 catches and 5 touchdowns of his own. Very productive as a backup tight end. And before Darren Waller broke out, he had Jared Cook having almost 900 yards. All 3 seasons that Frank Smith was the tight end coach for the Oakland Raiders, the Raiders had a tight end lead their team in receptions all 3 years. So this was kind of the thing that started to put him on the map, I feel like. Now, before his stint in Oakland, he was with the Bears, also as a tight end coach. So this guy has a thick background as a tight end coach. For 3 years, he was there, and most of his time was spent on Zach Miller, which ended up not working out because of injury. But Zach Miller was on his way, had a good year in 2015, and then kind of broke out in 2016, 47 catches, almost 500 yards. And then 2017, he was on his way, and then injuries happened. By the way, this is the other Zach Miller, obviously. Our Zach Miller retired after the Super Bowl. So this is a different Zach Miller. He was going to be probably a really good tight end in this league, and then he got hurt. That first year in Chicago, his top tight end was Martellus Bennett, if you guys remember him at all. Former Cowboy, former Giant. Had a little bit at the end of his career from Martellus. Okay, so that gets us through most of the recent stuff, most of the really important stuff. I do want to go back a little bit further though and say that this is a, Sean Payton tree guy. At the end of the if you go to the very start of his career, he was a Sean Payton guy. He was an assistant offensive line coach under Sean Payton in New Orleans for about 5 years. And look, the Saints' offense those 5 years was really good. All the Sean Payton years and even the suspension year, the Saints' offense was good, and their offensive line was known to be one of the best. Some of the notable offensive linemen he coached during this 5 years included Teron Armstead, Ben Grubbs, Jonathan Goodwin, Jari Evans, legendary Jari Evans in my opinion, Zach Streif, Jermon Bushrod, Carl Nix, and John Stinchcomb. And most of these guys made at least one Pro Bowl in their career as a member of the Saints. So these were some very prolific offensive linemen that he did get to work with. Now, I will say this, I don't know how many of these guys he really developed. A lot of them he inherited. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that he developed Ben Grubbs. That's obviously not the case. He didn't develop Jari Evans, who was a elite player before he got there. But he was involved in a lot of really good offensive line play during his time in New Orleans. And before then, we have to go back to his time with the Butler Bulldogs as an offensive coordinator slash offensive line coach for 3 years. They had good offenses. They scored almost 30 points a game in 2008. Who knows what that means, though, right? 2009, they actually went 11-1. They were one of the best teams in their on their level, I guess. In their, I know division's not the right word, but you guys know what I mean. And then before that, he was a Butler Bulldog, just offensive line coach for a year. It's not a major school at all, so there isn't a ton to say about what he did in Butler. I'm not going to act like that's meaningful, but I will say that for a younger guy with not a ton of experience, the resume's clean. Is it robust enough is the question. This guy has 2 years of coordinator experience where he's been really good underneath a guy that we all understand to be an offensive genius in Mike McDaniel. After a forgettable year in before a forgettable year in LA, he was a great tight end coach, but how much of that is can we really attribute to him? Like, how are we really going to say this guy's going to make a good head coach because he was a really good tight end coach for 6 years? Seems like a little bit of a reach. How much are we going to use the Saints stuff? That was over 10 years ago that he was an assistant offensive line coach underneath an elite head coach. So, I don't know. This one, the Miami stuff is really tempting, right? Because what Miami did this year around a limited quarterback and a limited offensive line was crazy impressive. But again, I'm trying to separate Frank Smith from McDaniel, and I'm looking at this and I'm just thinking to myself, other than that, you've got a bunch of good years as a tight end coach. That's about it. I feel like we can take a little bit more of a known quantity than Frank Smith. Now, I will say this. There are things about these coaching prospects that we cannot possibly know because they've never had the chance to be a head coach yet. If a guy like Frank Smith is a slightly worse play caller and play designer than somebody like Ben Johnson, but he's a much better leader of men, as a head coach, that is more important. And I have no problem admitting that. So if that's the case, if they get him in a room and they decide, you know what, this guy's a better leader of men than Ben Johnson, we're going to hire him because of that, okay, I can get it. I can dig it. But that's impossible for us to know. See you guys later. Go Hawks. More stuff coming a little bit later.